The entire vibe around this time was that Duke Nukem Forever was this exotic masterpiece that might never come out, but if it did, it'd be the greatest thing ever. It's 2002 and Texas-based 3D Realms has gone through several publishers for Duke Nukem Forever. Previously, they were with Gathering of Developers, who were also Texas-based. Unfortunately, with the death of their co-founder Douglas Wayne Myers Jr., they had to close down their offices. What remains is consumed by Take-Two Interactive in New York City. Acquiring Duke Nukem Forever's publication rights initially set Gathering of Developers back $12 million, which exchanged into Take-Two's hands once they absorbed that company. $12 million sounds like a lot, but realistically that's not too bad since this is a very popular IP and everyone's excited for the game. It'll sell millions and make a fortune. Right? Well, here's the thing. 3D Realms is self-funding the game with their millions in savings. To summarize part of an interview with 3D Realms founder Scott Miller, we self-funded Duke Nukem 3D, which cost us about $300,000 to make. We decided to self-fund Duke Nukem Forever as well so that we could have total control without the publisher breathing down our backs. We were perfectionists, which was okay in the 90s, but past that point, teams began to get much bigger and so too did game budgets. Duke Nukem Forever had on average 23, when it should have been at least 40. Post-mortem, people will often say that Duke Nukem Forever's frequent keep-ups killed the game. And it did, though it's interesting to think about the possibilities here. If 3D Realms had enough staff when it mattered, maybe they could have finished the game before George Broussard played 2002's The Thing and decided the game now requires snow levels. And that is just the beginning. The rumor is that at the time, if Broussard played something new and saw that they had an interesting game mechanic that Duke Nukem Forever did not, they had to find a way to incorporate it. Because Duke Nukem Forever has to be the best game ever when it releases, according to George Broussard.
You'll never finish! You're letting everyone down! No, I'm not! I'm gonna make this game and it's gonna be the best thing that anyone has ever seen.
This became so much of an internal problem that fellow staff would try to keep him from seeing new games in fear that he'd make them put more stuff in Forever. Video games need to at some point cut the innovations, lock the game down, and polish it. But Broussard wouldn't budge. He was firm on the belief that this would all pay off in the long run. For now at least, things are under control. The team is spending their time working on the existing 2002 build. The art book tells us that the mule riding level got to the point where you could fight oncoming enemy aircraft and etc. It was probably similar to Lake Mead. We don't know for sure when they scrapped this level, but I wasn't able to find it being mentioned again beyond this point in the timeline. Sometime in mid-2002, Matt T. Wood took the responsibility of making what would have possibly been a final 3D model for Duke. Sadly, this is the only screenshot we've ever seen of it, to my knowledge at least. I'd like to share that after the leak of 2001's Duke Nukem Forever, Matt said on Twitter, "I wish this build was from 6 months later, because there's so much cool stuff that came after this build. One of those things probably wasn't the pulse rifle from Aliens. Still got the flag." Perhaps this was a passing fascination that Broussard had with the films. Nonetheless, you might be wondering why the game looks so different in this screenshot. And that's because it's from 2003. Why does the game look like this in 2003? Get ready, because this event will change a lot going forward. May 2002. It's E3, and Doom 3 is finally shown off to the world. Dynamic lighting, real-time shadows, it was incredible and blew the world away. And Broussard took that personally. In November 2002, he introduced a new deferred render that they've designed for the game. Our rendering engine has virtually nothing to do with Unreal anymore. It's all ours and not really comparable in any way, said George Broussard. So what's the problem? On top of their existing 2002 build, this new renderer of theirs created some problems. It's been rumored many times over that this caused the game's levels and textures to go black, but it turns out that this new renderer wasn't as big a deal as is often implied. According to Charlie Wiederhold, the lighting change didn't result in an immediate redoing of all the levels, especially not any sort of scrap them and replan them. Almost every time, the changes were done in such a way that the existing data was able to continue being used with minor to no interruption. He elaborates on the misconception by saying that those who saw black textures and levels could have been using an incompatible graphics card, or perhaps the recompile under new terms box wasn't checked in the editor. Regardless how much of a pain in the ass this was or wasn't, the team still had a lot of catching up to do. Much of the following year was spent tinkering with the game's code and restoring content using generated bump map tech. They would fully complete this process by 2004. So how far along was their 2002 version of the game before their new renderer? You'll get different stories depending on who's being asked, either that it was nearly finished or that it still had a long way to go. Many believe Frederick Schreiber was a smidge too optimistic when he said this build was 90% complete, even if his intentions were pure at heart. I did a poll on my channel which was shared in a few Duke spots. 3,000 voted, and only 27% believed that it could have been 90% complete in 2002. Of course, this is all speculation based. Unless we see it with our own eyes, we can never be absolutely sure. Schreiber once suggested that the source of the final game's story, and some gameplay elements, root from this period in development. What took the biggest hit seems to have been the game's story, as many new concepts would emerge. One such being for Duke to save a dog who would become his companion, fighting and fetching for the player in several levels. I was able to make contact with Scott Miller, who helped me clarify a few things. Thanks to him, we now know that the dog, whose name was suitingly just Dog, came from around this period. The dog was eventually scrapped upon experimenting with dog AI and finding it rather difficult to work with. Another idea they've told us about is how there was this one conceptualized sequence where Duke Nukem and Dr. Proton would meet for the first time as kids on the playground. This would have created a very interesting origin story for the two's rivalry. Closing off 2002, we have the return of Bombshell, designed in concept by Feng Zhu. There exists a model for this version, and while the concept art is from 2003, this model is unfortunately undated. 2003. Oh boy, this year is rough. We begin the year with 18 people working on the game. In January, Broussard announces that they're not using Unreal Tournament level tech, instead implementing Unreal Tournament 2003 properties like static meshes. In addition, Broussard points out that the game will have a massive use of pixel shaders. I don't think we'll even be recognized as an Unreal Engine game at this point, says Broussard. As the years passed, fans would start to take notice to the absence of Dr. Proton in any of the game's at-time recent or upcoming media. The truth is, as we've learned in hindsight, 2003 marked a lot of changes to the game's plot. The Snatcher invasion, and whatever else was left of Dr. Proton, began slowly fading into nothingness as the focus shifted to another full-scale alien invasion. Guys, I tried very hard to find an answer as to why the story was abandoned, but unfortunately there were no sources I could find, and those I spoke with weren't exactly sure either. As a refresher, the original story of Duke Nukem Forever went something like this. Proton takes over Area 51, mutates its guards into ants, and uses a classified spaceship to contact other alien species to kill Duke Nukem and take over the world. Then last time, in 2001, a race of creatures called the Snatchers emerged. They begin to infect the EDF and civilians, who are then zombified. The origin of these creatures and how they're able to make humans vomit tentacles would probably have been explained later into the game. And finally, the Gold story.
The aliens have returned! Run!
Okay, admittedly they did have some new ideas between now and then, but this was a very secretive period for 3D Realms. In the span of 3 years, they only posted to their forums 7 times. We're still making it. It's not cancelled. When it's done. Goodbye. An anonymous former employee would go on to say that Broussard and Miller were still working on the game with a 1995 mentality.
There wasn't that much room for perfectionism. You basically had to shoot for something less than perfect, but we continued to try and really make a game that was too ambitious.
Now, to quote a popular Wired article by Clive Thompson, the truth is, Broussard's financial freedom had cut him off from all discipline. He could delay making the tough calls seemingly forever. One day, Broussard would come into the office and say, "We could go another 5 years without shipping a game." And apparently he was very happy knowing about this stress-free situation, but the others just groaned. In February, their publisher Take-Two wrote down the publishing rights for Duke Nukem Forever as a $5.5 million loss due to the game's extended development time. The confidence in this project ever completing now begins to dwindle from all sides. And of course there are some Broussard-related consequences, but before we get to that, how's development going? Multiple new enemy concepts were in the works. One of their first new designs was the Assault Commander, which looked a bit different compared to later builds. They also began working on Pig Cop tank designs, reminiscent of Duke Nukem 3D. Very cool indeed. Screenshots from around this time show off the new renderer's abilities. It's surprising how much of a difference this made to the game. The interior locations appear much darker now, akin to what you'd see in Doom 3. Here's a screenshot of a Snatcher, but no tentacle zombies in sight. This is actually the last time we'd ever see the Snatcher. Then in this same year, we find concept art of a new enemy, the Pregnator. Understanding its role in the final game has led me to believe that the Snatcher model exists in these screenshots as a temporary placeholder only. When designing the Pregnator, Broussard suggested, so long as it has testicles and a penis, we're good to go. Now I don't know who took this comment so literally, but here it is, the walking fucking penis. Many years later, Broussard confirmed in a forum reply that in 2003, they had achieved full body awareness for Duke. In other words, you're able to look down and see your legs. It's a great detail that's often missed, especially back then. According to Charlie Wiederhold, one build from this year has a version of the Stratosphere Mall that's playable in rough form. For those who don't know, this level, and many others, didn't make it into the final game. Finding out that an official playable version of the level exists is great, but we might never see it, so that's pretty disappointing, especially as this level has become a bit of a fan favorite for followers of the 2001 leak. Gearbox gave us gameplay footage of what Duke Nukem Forever looked like in 2003 with the released game in 2011. Here are my notes. They're still using the Shades OS. This here's the best version of Lake Mead that we've ever seen. Not too much shown for the interior areas here. This character throwing its tentacle arm at Duke is probably Fat Mama, or some iteration of her. She's described quite a bit in the limited edition guide. When killed, she was supposed to release octobabies. Fat Mama is the last zombie character that we've ever seen in-game, although there's a fair bit of concept art that shows several other designs. Here you can see Duke fighting some octobrains in the city streets while many ships zoom past in the distance. Makes you think of the scale of this invasion, where the odds seem to be stacked against our protagonist. It's exciting, though for all we know this could have just been a smoke and mirrors scenario. Duke walks around what might be the Duke Cave, all the while his shades complete a download, virus scan, and installs a patch. He's awarded with a radar function. Not too much else to say about this gameplay, it was a recovery period for the team anyways. On April 1st, 2003, 3D Realms released the original Duke Nukem 3D source code to compensate for the game's many failed release targets. Very nice. Thanks for letting me play Duke Nukem 3D on my PSP. In May 2003, Take-Two Interactive said Duke Nukem Forever would not come out that year. The reason? Financial difficulties with the game's ongoing delays. Jeff Lappin, the CEO of Take-Two, was quoted saying this: "We're in a wait-and-see mode at this point. Right now, we're just hopeful that 3D Realms will finish it." Later in the same day, George Broussard would write on the Shack News message boards, and oh man, if you haven't seen this one before... Alright, here we go. Take-Two needs to shut the fuck up, IMO. All we want to do is keep quiet, work on the game, then emerge later to show you what we're working on. We don't want hype, we don't want drama. We don't want Take-Two saying stupid-ass things in public for the sole purpose of helping their stock. It's our time and our money we are spending on the game. So either we're absolutely stupid and clueless, or we believe in what we are working on. In December, Jeffrey Lappin said, "I had a recent conversation with the developers of Duke Nukem Forever. They expect the game to be completed sometime at the end of 2004 or the beginning of 2005. It's 2004. Forthcoming, 3D Realms' absence in the media began to give Duke Nukem Forever this mysterious, elusive feel. Does it even exist? Is it some kind of money laundering scheme? Is it benefiting from all this time, resulting in what'll no doubt be the greatest video game ever? These are all questions I've read from forums around the time. You can't mention the history of Duke Nukem Forever without acknowledging the millions waiting for it. It would occasionally break into mainstream media as well, like the comics. I mean, if it's in Foxtrot, it must be trendy. Between now and 2006, 24 to 28 people are working on the game. Broussard believes that Duke Nukem Forever should be released in 2004, or at the very least, before Doom 3. In January, he announced that they've written their own AI system, rendering, particles, skeletal animations, and more so as to keep the game from looking like an Unreal Engine 1 game. He follows by saying, "I don't think licensing an engine was a smart move for us. We're pretty uncompromising in what we want to do. We don't like having limitations." The game's story is now considered fixed, according to Broussard, although many ideas from now and onwards are noticeably absent from the final. There's only 3 available screenshots from this year. We get to see what appears to be a new Duke model for 2004, although it could be a close-up of Matt Wood's model. Duke's holding his good old Ripper cannon now, which marks the departure of Duke's attached American flag. Let's check out the concept art. Hogs, weapons. More hogs? In retrospect, 3D Realms often remarks about this being a very hog-focused version of the game, for some reason. These guys are called the Pig Runts, which were meant to behave in a similar comedic fashion to the grunts you find in Halo. Designer Joe Jing brought many new monstrosities into the game, like this boss hog. God, there's like mold growing all over this thing. This year, 3D Realms would hire David Regal, and his first course of action would be to tone down the game's intensity on hogs. Turns out not everyone was a fan of Jing's disturbing creations, despite how technically impressive they were. Regal once expanded on the state of the game when he first joined the team. The Vegas streets were built and they looked great. The city was whole and intact, and a lot of destruction happened as you went through. He believed 3D Realms could finish up what they had and still be an industry leader. But Broussard's impression was that they were still far from finished. One ex-dev has said that there are plenty of archived video recordings of the game between the years of 2004 and 2006, but they're either lost or locked away somewhere. Sadly, there's no publicly available gameplay footage from this and the following year. In September, something bizarre happened. Take-Two CEO Rich Rodel says in an investor meeting that Forever is now using Doom 3 technology. This news hit the net by storm, as plenty of articles surfaced discussing the matter, only for George Broussard to later in the day deny it. This was probably just a mistake on Rodel's part. It's quite possible he was thinking of another in-development 3D Realms game, which we will discuss later. Hilarious timing, but 5 days later, Broussard would announce a new major change to the game. They would be switching from their existing Karma Physics code to a new code by a Swedish company, Mequon. I hope I'm saying that right. Broussard's decision was made following, of course, Half-Life 2's hype surrounding the Source Engine's impressive physics demonstrations.
For our team, it was always kind of playing catch-up. We were always like behind other games when they came out, So new games would come out with newer technology and stuff, and it was like, well, crap, we can't come out with Duke Forever, with lesser technology than these games.
George Broussard might have been able to keep this charade going on his own, but 3D Realms founder Scott Miller was starting to get annoyed with Broussard's endless delays, and how much money he's allowed himself to dump into this one project. In an effort to save the game, Miller begins to arrange for Digital Extremes to take over development. This idea was accepted by others. As Digital Extremes and Take-Two agreed, this could be the best thing for the game. And guess where this goes? Broussard shuts down the idea, and without his approval, the project is not gonna budge. This is what Miller considers the fatal suicide shot for Duke Nukem Forever. It's 2005 and Take-Two is losing more stock. Wait, that's not a good thing. In filing with the US Securities and Exchange Commission, Take-Two decreased their eventual payment for the game from $6 million to $4.25 million. In doing so, Take-Two offers 3D Realms a $500,000 bonus to the $4.25 million, only if they're able to deliver the game before the turn of 2007. And what did Broussard say? We don't care about the bonus. Never ship a game early. So, how's the game doing? There's an assortment of screens we have from Gearbox that represent what the game looked like this year. Not much of a difference from 2004, but it doesn't look bad. This one interior reminds me of the Enterprise. I would love to explore this. Looks like the Pregnator made its way into the game. And here's concept art of a Duke Burger. It's an iconic burger chain from Duke Nukem 3D. This location would end up taking over the role of the Stratosphere Mall. Here's an in-game render of NegaDuke. Signs point to this image being from 2005, but it's hard to know for certain. Whatever the case, this was the last time we would ever see him. In the 2005 June issue of PC Gamer, the 3D Realms game Prey is given a world-exclusive feature. Not only was this absent game coming back from the dead, but it was contracted to be developed by Human Head Studios. Prey has its own remarkable story that I'm not at the lengths to expand on right now. Where Duke gets involved is with a short report on Forever in the same issue. According to the report, after PC Gamer got their hands on the Prey preview, 3D Realms gave them a sneak peek of Duke Nukem Forever. It was, to quote the author, up and running and in very fine form indeed. Broussard says most of the game's weapons and creatures are done. Most levels exist and there's plenty of gameplay. He finishes off by saying, Duke Nukem Forever won't be vaporware for much longer. At the time, 3D Realms had a team just short of 30, but then, another disaster emerged for Duke Nukem Forever, the Staff Dropout. Remember how Forever is using Mequon physics code? On September 1st, a company known as AGEIA acquired Mequon. Following this, George Broussard would confirm that this could cause more development delays. Now, I'd guess it wasn't this event that caused the following, but you can only accept so many delays. An unfortunate reality check begins in waves across the team. Former programmer Scott Alden wrote the following on Shack News. I left. I was bummed out after working on the same project for 5 years without any end in sight. In 2010, he was interviewed in D Magazine, where he makes note of having to work 6 days a week for 10 hours with very little to show for it in the end. This was the only 3D title a lot of their staff had ever worked on professionally, meaning if they were to quit, they wouldn't have much to put on their resumes for other job postings. What's worse is the low recurring pay from 3D Realms, who promised their staff a big payout once the game is actually shipped. So what should happen when the game keeps getting pushed back further and further? Is it worth sticking around? Evidently for many, the answer was no. By the end of 2005, 10 major team members had left 3D Realms. This included familiar faces like Brian Cousins, Keith Schuler, Charlie Wiederhold, among others. Many went on to greener pastures, like Gearbox for example. The dropout lasted essentially until August 2006, leaving 3D Realms once again with closer to 18 people working on their game. Was it ever a good idea to bet on Duke? January 2006. Here is yet another Duke Nukem model, this time made by Mark Skelton. It's often considered by the community to be the best 3D model of Duke Nukem around. Among the concepts from this year, I found a 3D model of Britney Spears' face, and that's about it. In March, a post was published by 3D Realms. In it, Broussard says, "We've been tech complete for a year. The team's just pulling it all together to make it fun." But at this point, the community would take whatever positive news Broussard had with a grain of salt. For April Fool's Day, Ars Technica posted a fake review of the game to their website. Not sure how many believed it, but for those that did, Duke Nukem Forever has a lawnmower motor-powered dildo weapon. In April, Broussard showed off some videos of the game's progress and test levels, some of which probably make up the very laggy 2006 video that Gearbox released with the game.
Wow, what a reception.
This Conan O'Brien knockoff shows some terrible facial animations which are actually quite normal into a game's development, but not so much for one that's been developing for 10 years. I noticed that the 3D stripper at the casino's entrance has been replaced by a statue of Duke, who's seemingly standing on top of an alien's corpse. I see the Easy brand is still around. Here we can see Joe Jing's Octobrain model in action, where Duke shoots it using a shotgun that's very reminiscent of the finals. It was inspired by Broussard's own shotgun that he picked up at a gun show, originally from the Texas Department of Corrections. Seems they've made a new skybox. Perhaps it's updated with newer construction. I'd love to see it in its entirety. The fathership looks a bit different now, although at some point it's mysteriously renamed to the mothership, so that might be what that is. You can see that thematically they're swapping for a more Duke Nukem 3D sequel situation. The only enemies you see here are returning from that game. Here's a test map with a monster truck. Level designer David Regal once confirmed that this truck was to replace the mule ride, so this was probably quite new at the time. 2001's deployable riot shield was pretty cool, but how about stationary electric shields? I'd prefer the riot shield. Beyond the gunfire, you can hear some kind of distorted voice, which might be the building's PA system telling people to evacuate. Who knows, gunfire drowns it all out.
How'd it go, King?
Hey, the man.
Seeing the same identical clones within 5 meters is a little weird. Oh, there's Mona Lisa with her sunglasses again. Much as I'd love to say that the game was getting a redemption, sadly that isn't the case. As mentioned in the last year, staff would continue to leave throughout 2006. Once staff members were stabilized again, Broussard created a new estimate for its release. The game would be another 2 years away at least. At this point, Scott Miller was dumbfounded that the game had been taking this long, as he said in an interview with The Hollywood Reporter. So what did Broussard do next? Hire more developers. Need more help. Must go faster. Scotty, we need more power. After this endeavor, the team would grow from roughly 18 to 35 people. If there's anything to give Broussard, dude sure doesn't give up. According to an at the time new hire Tremel Isaac, Broussard was very clear that taking a position at 3D Realms would be challenging and chaotic, and Isaac says he respects him for that. So hey, that's some good on the old Georgie. However, Broussard seemed a bit defeated by this point. You see, journalist Tom Chick was actually allowed inside the offices to take a look at the game, which would actually mark the first time that anyone would see the game in years outside of 3D Realms. When sitting down to play, Broussard monitored him with an index card in hand, and would often refer to it when discussing the game's features. Broussard would then tell Tom Chick about how he believes they, quote, fucked up, had to throw everything out and start all over again. Unfortunately, what Broussard actually meant by this, and how it got to this point again, doesn't seem to be publicly documented. But picking back up after so many important people have left your company, I mean, that couldn't be easy. Especially if the sort of talent you need isn't there anymore. Or perhaps, another possibility, it was due to the turn of a new console generation, which would have provided an additional learning curve. For how many people were still interested in Duke Nukem Forever 10 years later, they didn't need a perfect game. While the wait certainly didn't help, this did keep Duke Nukem Forever on the radar for some who didn't even play video games. So no matter what happens, the game should sell. It's only a matter of getting it out there. I'll end with this. A quote from Charlie Wiederhold. To get any of the game's significant updates to a workable state was easy, but getting Forever to a shippable state was a whole different, subjective beast.